Hi everyone, I'm making this video to talk more about growth in tech careers. Salaries in tech, especially in India, are very diverse. Just on entry level alone, you have companies that pay like 2 lakhs per annum, and at the same time, you have companies that pay like 40 lakhs, even in a bad market. So, a gap of 20x. And this gap only becomes wider and wider with more experience, especially if you're not growing in your role. And what's the then way to move up in this ladder and bridge this gap? The only way to do that is by building the right skills and capabilities. Hi, I'm Anshuman Singh, and I'm making this video to deep dive into what it takes for you to grow in your career. I also then want to take you through the scalar curriculum to talk more about how the curriculum actually bridges the gap that I'm talking about. I believe the scalar curriculum is one of the most comprehensive curriculum for your path, but then I'll also show you that. So I assume that you are currently a fresher or somebody from non-tech who wants to get into tech. If you are not that, then I would recommend please go and check the description of this video. There are videos for other personas as well. Please look at who you are, open the corresponding link, and then go and watch that video. If you stay back in this video, then I'm going to assume that you are a fresher or a non-tech. Now, on a very high level, if you're a fresher or non-tech, you could have the following targets. Either you could become an SD1 backend at a good company, or you could become an SD1 full stack or a front end at a good company. I'm not going to discuss the path to maybe, let's say, a not so good company. I mean, so for example, there are these mass service companies that might not pay very well. I'm not going to discuss the path to that. I mean, whatever you're going to learn, if you're learning for a very good company, all smaller companies already get covered there. Now, if you're looking at a path to a backend or a full stack or a front end role at a good company, uh, those paths are slightly different. So I'm going to talk about both of them one by one. Let's start with backend first. In backend, what is broadly important? Now, look, in backend and full stack, broadly, what is important for you is you should be very good in problem solving, which is essentially DSA. You might get easy questions, medium questions, hard questions across any topic, and you have to be good at CS fundamentals, which means you might get questions on databases or multi-threading, operating systems, some bit of computer networks, and you have to have one impressive project with proof of quality. Now, what is proof of quality? I will describe a little later. And obviously, like if you have built the project, then you should be able to talk about the project. You should be able to talk about the tech stack that you use. If somebody pokes you on those tech stack, then you should be able to answer questions there. If you have done those, then you're in some ways ready. I'll then talk about the interview rounds that happen, and then it basically ties those together. So for both track, DSA, CS fundamentals, projects. Obviously, the kind of projects depending on backend or full stack changes. Um, and the kind of tech stack also changes depending on backend or full stack. So let's start with backend first. On backend, let me describe like what are the interviews going to be like, what is your work going to be like, and hence what should you learn. Um, and then for learning that, then like what's the curriculum like? I will also describe that later. So I'll first describe like both tracks: interview, work, and then finally curriculum. Let's start with backend interviews. You'll have, as I said, like you will have a few DSA rounds. Assume at least two DSA rounds, no matter which company you apply to. Easy to hard questions, and like you should expect questions from any topic. Post that, there is what they call as tech round. Now tech round has questions from your CS fundamentals, so basically databases, concurrency, sometimes some bit of network, however little rare, um, and questions in for the language that you primarily use. Now most jobs for entry level are Java heavy. So if you're somebody who's a fresher or a non-tech just starting with coding, I would say you should start with Java because that opens up more jobs for you. And in that case, your tech round will focus on advanced Java. So maybe concepts like streams, collections, Lambda, um, and so forth. And then you have the project round. Some people also call it the design round, where your project is discussed in depth. In a way, you were asked question, if you were designing the same project again, what would you do differently, for things that you have used in your project. Then maybe deeper questions there. So for example, if you say, for example, that you have used microservices, then you might get a bunch of questions on microservices. If you say that I've used MongoDB, then you get questions on MongoDB. Hey, look, I mean, how would you shard a MongoDB? How would you scale a MongoDB? Why did you use MongoDB? um, some companies like Flipkart, Udan, they also do a machine coding round. Now machine coding round is where, let's say, you're given something to build from scratch in 90 minutes. um, and I mean, as long as you have something functional, you have used the right design principles, great. There is one round after that where you're actually asked questions on why you use a particular design pattern. So schema design, API design, and code design. um, and hence, I mean, your knowledge of schema design, API design is also important. Basic design patterns also important, oops, etc., right? um, and I mean, because you'll be building projects, so one MVC framework also important. There are going to be cultural fit rounds as well, but I'm assuming you'll do well there. So those are your rounds if you're interviewing for an SD1 backend position. Hence, projects very important, CS fundamentals very important, and DSA very important. If you look at work, however, obviously everything that is addressed in interviews that matters. Knowledge of your design patterns, that starts to matter. Some bit of knowledge of system design, that also starts to matter. But the most important skill is that you should be comfortable with learning new tech from documentation. Because I mean, your new workplace will have its own libraries, might have its own code base, would have might be using its own cloud, who knows. All of that you will have to learn by reading through the documentation. And the hence, that is a skill that needs to be developed. You'll be working on a large code base, so some amount of comfort with large code base is obviously going to be helpful. um, and I mean, you have to assume wherever you go and join for work, things will break in production. Are you able to troubleshoot quickly or not? That is also an important skill. Now the question is, if these are the skills, then how do I build it? I will show it to you in the curriculum as well, but just give me a little bit of time. I'll also discuss the full stack part of it as well. Now if you're, let's say, targeting an SD1 front end or full stack position, then interview rounds, it's very similar. You have a few DSA rounds, you have tech rounds. However, now in tech rounds, um, you typically get asked questions around JavaScript, CSS, and then maybe one backend framework like Java or Node.js, and maybe some libraries or frameworks like React and Angular. Um, in fact, it is also possible that your round itself begins with an assignment where you are asked to build something, and depending on how you built it, like, then you're taken further in the future rounds. So you could get assignments as well. In some tech rounds, you might get asked questions on databases in tech round, databases or maybe basic multi-threading. However, like, multi-threading is not usually asked in front end positions. Then you have these design rounds where, again, questions on your project that you've built. The project has to be really good for your resume to even get shortlisted, especially given the competition these days. um, you have machine coding rounds, again, which is judged on how do you design your API, how do you design your schema, how do you design your classes. Hence, API and schema design also very important, required for machine coding rounds. um, there might be questions around web architecture. um, for example, how does browser work, how do you optimize a website, um, what are CDNs, for example. um, how does, let's say, like the JavaScript engine work? Do you really understand that it's single threaded? How does, let's say, an event loop work? So things like those. Or maybe you might be asked, in certain cases, this is rare, but a scenario based design question, that, let's say, if you were designing Google Calendar, what are the APIs that Google Calendar should have, and like, how would you change those APIs? How would you show these, how you see a Google Calendar, right? Like, how would you implement those UI elements, things like those. Now your work is also very similar as in the case of backend. um, Same like backend, you have to have like high level of comfort with learning new tech from document and understanding large code bases. The one difference is like you also need to be get now good at optimizing websites. So understanding what does it take to optimize website, that is important. And again, like I'll talk about what does it take in a short while. So those are the two parts for you, right? Backend or front end full stack. Um, and I mean, this is what the interview and work sort of looks like. I now take you through the curriculum at Scalar. At Scalar, in the curriculum, you get both options, back and full stack. You might not be sure of what to choose on day one, which is absolutely fine. You have to make that choice after you have finished DSA and relational databases module. Let me first explain, however, right? Like some of you might come with prior coding experience, some of you might not. So if you do not come with prior coding experience, you do not know how to code, there is a beginner section even before DSA where you get to learn the basics of a coding language. We choose Java because most of the jobs are Java oriented, and hence like you start learning to how to code in for 2 months in the beginner section in Java. Post that, then you move to DSA module. Now the DSA module is 5 months, very comprehensive with list of all topics, a lot of practice inside the DSA module. Um, now, there are bunch of courses outside that are just like 3 month, 4 month courses. Look, I mean, if you have to do a good job of just DSA alone, it's going to take 5 6 months, and then you have other modules after that. So it's beyond me how you would complete a curriculum in 3 months, 4 months. You then end up compromising on the depth of concepts, which is bad for your career for later. However, that aside, every single class that happens here is live, followed by assignments where you get to practice. One thing to keep in mind, and this is a common mistake that a lot of beginners make, is they believe it is all about memorizing the approach, or let's say remembering what kind of code to write. That's not what DSA is about. DSA is about building that part of your muscle which can see a new problem, can think of how do I go about solving this problem and finding an efficient approach for this problem. And then once you have the approach, how do you translate that to a code? So you're learning that skill, you're not memorizing. And that is what the scalar program will also do. It will push you to develop that part of your brain instead of telling you the solution every single time. um, Anyway, but if you do that well, firstly, very important for interviews, most number of rounds are going to be DSA rounds. If you do that well, one big chunk of the problem statement is already solved. It is very very important, however not sufficient, you still need other modules as well. Two is, in jobs as well, it helps. If you write a lot of code, you now become more accurate, no making no bugs, you'll be more productive. You start thinking of efficiency as the first thing when designing a solution. And when it comes to understanding large scale systems, again, like having good knowledge of DSA will help. In a way, if you've done this, then everything with respect to DSA should be taken care of. The one small caveat here to keep in mind is that this entire DSA, because you're a beginner, is broken down into two parts. There is one part of basic DSA, which you should definitely know for all companies. And then there's an advanced part of DSA, which is roughly 1 to 2 months. If you do not struggle with DSA, then you should do that as well. That helps with maybe certain other even higher class companies. Um, if not, then I would just suggest keep first complete the basic DSA and maybe the other modules, and then come back to let's say advanced DSA later. Post DSA, you have relational databases. Again, you have rounds completely on relational databases in your tech round, so hence very very important module for you. Here you basically learn about databases. You learn about how to write queries in databases, all things, I mean joins, aggregation, window functions. A lot of people, you'd be surprised, do not know about window functions, subqueries, views. And then maybe how do transactions work, how, what are isolation levels, what is indexing, and most importantly, how to design a schema in relational databases. This helps you with schema design round, SQL queries. I mean, a lot of companies do the first round where they ask you a coding question, and then I mean the maybe to also write certain SQL questions. It also helps with questions around indexing and transactions in the tech round. And I mean, whatever project you build, you're going to be using a database, relational database, absolutely, right? You might ask me a question, hey, look, but why not NoSQL databases? NoSQL databases is also covered, but in later modules. Now, the databases module and DSA module, extremely important for you. But the next module, which is building your first project, that is even more important for you. By the way, just after databases, you have a choice now. Now, here is where you choose whether you want to go into backend or full stack. Assuming you choose backend, then you have 1 month of project. This is where you get started with your first project. Um, Again, we choose Java as the language for the project right now because assuming you're a fresher or non-tech, you're anyhow getting started. Most jobs are Java oriented, so hence we push for Java. However, if you have very high inclination towards other programming languages, other tech stack, no worries. All the other modules were language agnostic. In this module as well, we share you resources for other language so that you can carry along the classes, and you have assignments then as per your language, especially Python. Actually, not the other language, but Python. So anyway, so in project, you basically learn about Git, learn about APIs, basics of API design, a framework like Spring Boot, um, basic things like authentication, third-party APIs, schema versioning. You get started with cloud, AWS. So how to set up EC2, RDS, etc., etc. And then you start building something on that cloud. I mean, so for example, you integrate a payment gateway in that project. You do pagination, searching, sorting in that project. You optimize your APIs through basic caching in your project. So this becomes your one basic project, which is still very impressive. Most people at that level have not done caching, have not implemented caching, have not implemented pagination, have not worked on cloud. So if you have completed this project, you're already a little bit differentiated from others, but there is more to come. Note that in all of these classes, again, you have assignments where you have to implement a feature, and if that feature is implemented well, then it passes the unit tests, and hence we know that you have done it properly. Your assignment is completed automatically. By the way, I keep saying this is one of the most important modules. The reason is that because there are a lot of people who might be other freshers as well, your shortlisting of resume is dependent on the quality of project. If you come from a fresher background or a non-tech background, then high quality projects are mandatory. And this is one high quality project which will start helping you, but you should not stop here. You should have more projects on your resume which are very high quality, innovative, which makes your resume stand out. Projects can easily help you stand out. This project is mandatory for you. Then you come to the LLD1 or advanced language concepts. This is where you learn about OOPS, object oriented programming. You learn about multi threading, part of your tech rounds, and you learn about advanced concepts of Java. Now, because you built the project in Java, then hence it is advanced concepts of Java. If let's say you were a Python coder, you build your project in Python, then you would get the corresponding videos and like resources for Python. One thing, however, to keep in mind is while we focus on Java here, one of the things we keep emphasizing is please do not identify yourself as just a Java developer. If tomorrow there is a need to, let's say, learn Python and then like start contributing in another Python project, absolutely go for that. Do not let language be a barrier. You should be a language agnostic software engineer first. So you use whatever tech stack is right for the use case, and you should be open to learning it. Anyway, if you do this module, then it helps with all forms of questions in your tech round. So questions on Java, advanced Java, questions on multi-threading, questions on OOPS. Same thing here. All there are assignments. Every class has assignments. Some MCQs, some situation based, some coding heavy. Um, and if you practice those, then the concept basically lands here. Post that you have the low level design round. Now here I'll tell you like basic design patterns important for you. So solid, singleton, maybe builder factory, those are important for you. And then maybe the other ones might be too advanced for you, good to know but not extremely important. But then the machine coding rounds happen. These are classes where we actually take a machine coding problem statement and then implement it end to end inside the class. We show you what decisions we took so that we can finish this within 90 minutes. What kind of design decisions we took? What would be a bad design? How do you implement, let's say, a tic tac toe or a parking lot or a book my show or a splitwise or maybe basic API design of Google Calendar end to end? That is being done in these classes. Very important for you because in machine coding round, this is going to help. You might get a different problem statement, but then you know how to go about thinking about the approach. This also helps with all kind of API design rounds and questions on basic design patterns. So do this as well. Post that, the next two modules, advanced software engineering concepts and system design HLD. These might not be as important for you, but good to do it. This is where you implement maybe certain more advanced systems. For example, you implement your project with Elasticsearch, Kafka, basic containerization like Docker. Maybe you might create basic microservices. So all of these are advanced concepts. If you implement that, then suddenly you become even more differentiated from your peers. If you do not implement that, it's not the end of the world. But like, look, I mean, if somebody has worked on these, then I would love to hire them as a backend developer as long as they understand these and they have put in their own hard work to go and find out more about these concepts and really, really implement it. Interview wise, I mean, look, you'll probably not get any questions on in interview on these concepts unless you have implemented it in your project. But it will help you at work. Chances are you're going to be working on these things in your work, so it will help you immensely at work. And then you have the system designer HLD module. Again, not very important for your interviews. However, this helps you understand how large scale systems are built along with case studies here. If you want, you can skip it. However, I would say why not go through it? It is only going to help you in your future. But if you want, you can skip it. Up to you. Post that you have electives. I mean, there's one elective on product management for engineers. There's one elective on data engineering. If you want, you can do those. There are career classes around time management, resume building, how to communicate properly. If you were senior, then like how do you do people management? All of that happens. You also have mentor that helps you. One thing, however, which I would mention is because projects are super important for you. So sure, I mean you have two very high quality projects happening inside the curriculum, but post that we also once you have finished your project, then we also do hackathons at Scalar time to time. Participate in those hackathons and create innovative projects. You will get notified of the hackathons. Participate, create teams, create innovative projects that will make your resume even more strong. So do all of this, and I mean then in a way, if you have learned these skills, you build the right project, then nobody is stopping you. Nobody can stop you. The second part is then the full stack track. In case let's say you've done DSA, DB, but you want to become a full stack engineer, here the one thing that changes is like same thing. You'll still build projects, but first you go deeper into HTML, CSS, JavaScript. You understand how the JavaScript engine works. A lot of times people skip over these. But to be honest, like one of the things that differentiates very, very good engineer is that they have very, very good knowledge of deep JavaScript. And that is what you're going to be evaluated on. So focus on the work here. Learn this once and but learn it properly. Then you understand web architecture. So basically, how does DOM work? How does web architecture work? How does browser work? How do you increase its performance? How do you prevent memory leaks? How do you optimize a website? And here is where you start to build small projects. So a Kanban board, for example. Um, Again, all of these are also backed by assignments, where um, assignments are either coding heavy, which means you build something and the system automatically evaluates, or I mean there are cases where unit test cases are run, or there might be MCQs. Here is where you also learn about React.js, and then you build a few again machine coding problems, and finally you get to the big project, which you build with a backend in Node.js, so NonTech stack. Um, and here it basically you follow the factory design pattern. You understand how to use MongoDB, how to do data validation, how to build authentication, um, how to integrate an external payment gateway, how do you add reviews, indexing, etc. And here you're doing it for a project like, let's say, building an IMDb or a Book My Show. You also integrate WebSocket, so in a way you've done the whole gamut of full stack development as well. So you'll have one very impressive project by the end of this module, and some small projects. Again, as I suggested, you should not stop here. You should also do one as part of hackathon whenever the hackathon happens. Post that there is system design, just like it was there in backend track as well. Same thing, optional, good to have, uh, nothing different here. And the electives are also the same. I know this was a long video, but I do hope that it does help you understand what you need to learn and the two options that are there in front of you, and how those two options pan out in case you choose one over the other. Thank you.